past 20 years, I've operated in two sectors: technology and innovation on the one, charity and nonprofit on the other. Throughout this time, some people have suggested that they're segregated. In fact, some people think they're diametrically opposed. But that's not been my experience. Much like I believe individuals are far more alike than we are different, I believe that the tech and charitable sectors have a lot to learn from each other. One of my favorite tech founders possessed all the attributes you'd want to see when backing a breakthrough technology. She was absolutely obsessed with the problem that she wanted to solve. She had tremendous technical expertise in that area. And she had such conviction that she bootstrapped her way to a solution, financing the development of it all by herself. But here's the twist. She wasn't from Silicon Valley, and she wasn't even from this century, or even the last. Catherine Dexter McCormick is best known as a social activist and philanthropist, but those definitions hardly do her justice. Born into a prominent Chicago family in 1875, her roots went all the way back to America's founding. Unlike many women of her class, her father encouraged her to pursue an education, and in 1904 she graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a degree in biology, where she is pictured here. After graduation, Catherine turned her attention to activism, working tirelessly to secure women the right to vote. During this period that she was introduced to the notion that a form of birth control, as easy to take as an aspirin, could serve as a catalyst for women's rights and a gateway for their independence. In 1947, Catherine's husband died, leaving her full control over his estate. At age 75, she was finally free to pursue her personal ambitions and quickly turned her attention to birth control. A few years later, in 1953, she visited a small lab outside Boston, where she met two scientists working to develop a safe and reliable oral contraceptive. At the end of that meeting, Catherine would write a seed investment check for $40,000, a small fortune at the time. That would be the first of many checks that she would write over the development of the drug. Not content to be a silent donor, she moved east from her luxurious home in Santa Barbara, California, to the lab in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She followed every stage of the development, constantly pushing the scientists to move faster and work harder. When the pill came on the market in 1960, the scientists who developed it were thrust into the national spotlight for their groundbreaking contributions to scientists. And yet, in the midst of all the attention generated by the pill, Catherine received virtually no mention. In fact, a few years later, when she died, none of the major papers carried her obituary. Despite this, she is not only a legendary philanthropist, she is a tech founder par excellence who deserves a place among the greats. To say that Catherine's pioneering efforts were transformative would be an egregious understatement. The changes she ushered in weren't just transformative, they were logarithmic. Women's participation in the workforce jumped from around a third in 1960 to nearly 60% today. In particular, women's representation in STEM fields has risen dramatically from less than 10% in 1960 to around 30% today. This rapid growth trajectory is underpinned by incredible gains in education. So let's take a look at that. Consider that women's share of bachelor's degrees has nearly doubled, from less than 30% in 1950 to just under 60% today. Their share of master's degrees has more than doubled, going from 25% in 1950 to just over 60% today. But the trend is most striking for doctorate degrees, where women have achieved a tenfold increase, from 5% before the introduction of the pill to 50% today, parity. These tremendous gains are driven primarily by women's ability to exert greater control over their bodies and therefore their futures, proving Catherine's hypothesis right again and again and again. So with Catherine's breathtaking example as evidence that the tech and charitable sectors need not be segregated, let's explore what they can learn from one another. Let's begin by talking about the ambition that animates each sector and the mindset that underpins it. Tech is famous for wildly ambitious goals. Think about Elon Musk's obsession with going to Mars and the power of artificial intelligence to transform everything from biology to the way that we interact as humans. Charities are equally, if not more, ambitious as they seek to tackle wicked problems that have persisted for decades. I think it's safe to say that neither sector lacks the motivation to achieve great things. And yet, the way they go about achieving their goals is decidedly different. Many of you will have heard the notion of fail fast, fail forward that drives tech startups to move relentlessly towards a solution. This no-holds-barred approach is embodied by another common phrase within tech sectors: move fast and break things. The mindset of the charitable sector is very different. It's far more empathetic, owing largely to the fact that charities and nonprofits serve clients, not users. Having worked in both sectors, I have been witnessing a convergence towards the middle, as tech firms become more empathetic to those who interact with their services, and charities adopt clear, quantifiable metrics to better test, iterate, and deliver. Now let's explore another critical area: risk and the relationship different sectors have towards it. In my experience, risk serves as one of the sharpest areas of difference between the sectors. Tech startups see risks as something to harness, an essential ingredient in innovation and in delivering outsized returns. The goal is to manage it, but never to eliminate it, because without risk, there can be no breakthrough. Charities often see risk as something to contain, a threat to credibility, funding, and mission delivery. Predictability is prized because donors want certainty that their donations will deliver impact. And yet that's not always what happens in practice. Part of this divergence is driven by what's at stake if things go sideways. While money isn't trivial by any stretch, it's often the biggest thing at risk with a startup. Consider that if a talented engineer works at what later becomes a failed startup, they're not done for. Their reputation isn't tarnished. In fact, it can serve as a badge of honor. But in the charitable sector, the stakes are higher. You simply can't play fast and loose with people's lives. There's a lot more on the line than just code. Another part of the divergence stems from each sector's backers. Failure is baked into the financial model that drives investment in the tech sector. So when 90%, yes, 90% of startups fail to yield the returns that were expected, no one's surprised. That's just how it works. But in the charitable sector, things are quite different. Most charities I've encountered are absolutely terrified of making mistakes, seeing it as the first step to losing critical funding. Donors, like me, often perpetuate this limiting belief because we often finance projects rather than causes. It should come as no surprise then that despite earnest efforts to put themselves out of business, most charities have grown bigger while the problems they want to solve are still unsolved. As both a tech investor and a charitable donor myself, I believe that a paradigm shift is necessary to catalyze innovation in the charitable sector. The problems we face are simply too complex and too urgent to continue relying on a model that stifles creativity. One example of this comes via the recent announcement by Bill Gates that he will draw down the $200 billion endowment of the Gates Foundation over the next 20 years. This daring decision marks a striking departure from the usual perpetual institution model among charities. By committing to sunset the foundation rather than operate it in perpetuity, Gates is staking both his personal legacy and the charity's reputation on delivering outsized impact in a remarkably compressed timeline. For context, consider that the Gates Foundation's annual giving is so large that it outstrips the international aid budgets of many of the world's wealthiest countries, including this one. Gates's blueprint suggests that making bold bets with clear deadlines can spur innovation and deliver systemic change. It challenges risk-averse institutions to think like mission-driven investors, making concentrated, high-stakes bets where failure is possible, but transformative success is within reach. Now, anyone who has examined the two sectors would acknowledge that they measure success very differently. For tech startups, success is pretty easy. It's visible and it's easy to measure. It's growth, sometimes growth at all costs. Meanwhile, charitable outcomes are much harder to quantify. A month ago, I hosted a conference centered on the idea of what does impact mean now? And I can tell you there were a lot of divergent views, but no agreement in terms of how we might measure it. So what can the two sectors learn from each other? Well, by incorporating social metrics the way charities do, tech firms can move beyond buzzwords and lay the foundation to achieve the positive outcomes they purport to enable by harnessing the tremendous power of technology. Meanwhile, by embracing experimentation the way that startups do, charities can uncover novel insights that will enable them to drive greater impact for more people in a shorter amount of time. Those familiar with our local tech ecosystem will recognize you don't have to go very far to find a terrific example of a company that has managed to achieve both profit and purpose. Founded in 2008, Calgary tech company Benevity has achieved what many considered a pipe dream, building a massively scalable business based on the notion that doing good should be good for business too. If you don't know about this amazing company, Benevity is a software platform that enables corporate purpose programs. Think workplace giving, volunteering, that kind of thing. Since its inception, Benevity has facilitated the donation of over $18.5 billion, billion with a B, dollars to over 500,000 nonprofits. It has enabled nearly 100 million volunteer hours, and it's raised over $100 million on its way to becoming a unicorn, a company worth $1 billion or more, which it achieved in 2020. Despite initial skepticism by traditional tech investors who felt the company's focus on purpose could prevent it from achieving venture scale returns, it was precisely this focus that ultimately attracted a solid user base that includes such blue chip names as Nike, Google, and Starbucks, enabling Benevity to make inroads across the Fortune 500 and beyond. Now, perhaps this might sound strange, but from the moment I learned what a philanthropist was, I wanted to be one. At a time when most young kids dream of being doctors or astronauts, I couldn't help but think that the most worthwhile vocation lied in using my talents in service of others. Much of that comes from the people who raised me. Brave, hard-working immigrant parents who took nothing for granted and embodied the notion that care for one's community serves as a cornerstone of strong character. They also emphasized that philanthropy wasn't about writing big checks or securing your name on the side of a building. In fact, they were adamant that acts of philanthropy should be done quietly, that it was a promise you make and fulfill to yourself. So that's what I set about to do. As soon as I began working after university, I established an endowment fund through the Calgary Foundation, where I had started volunteering a few years earlier. In time, the fund grew many times over, and today it's a key tool that enables my charitable mission to address vexing mental health issues, particularly among young men. But that's a subject for another talk. For now, I would like to conclude my presentation by talking about one of my favorite philanthropists, someone who used all the resources at his disposal to transform the world in ways that continue to reverberate years after his death. Adopted at a young age by a loving pair of teachers who had to promise his birth mother they would send him to college, he nonetheless dropped out soon after enrolling. But in the short period of time he attended college, he popped in and out of classes ranging from sociology to mathematics, eventually being drawn to the ancient art of calligraphy. In fact, his early appreciation for art and design would go on to distinguish the company he would later co-found, and which would come to serve as the vehicle by which he would bring about transformative change. Steve Jobs found calligraphy compelling because it revealed to him the beauty and artistry inherent in typography, qualities he felt science and mathematics simply couldn't capture. This exposure deeply shaped his design sensibility, directly impacting his life's work at Apple. It motivated him to build a suite of products, from MacBooks to iPhones, that have driven tremendous human progress in many important ways. And while the changes he ushered in have not been universally positive, the world is nonetheless a more connected place because of his desire to make things better. Much like Catherine Dexter McCormick, he too was a driven and passionate founder. And yet, by virtue of luck and circumstance, all of us know his name. Though the technology and charitable sectors can often feel like they're at opposite ends of a spectrum, with profit on one side and purpose on the other, both are driven by a common desire to change the world for the better. The best organizations in each sector borrow courage, urgency, and a deep sense of purpose from the other. And when the tech and charitable sectors cross-pollinate, designing for both sustainability and impact, the result isn't just a more creative startup or a more effective charity. It's a better world. Thank you.